secrets of the ether of the universe that most of us still know nothing about. But the ancients did know that the universe was not empty. It was filled with something. The classical element of ether, according to the ancient medieval science, ether, also spelled A-E-T-H-E-R or E-T-H-E-R, also called quintessence, is a material that fills the region of the universe above our terrestrial sphere. The concept of ether was used in several theories to explain several natural phenomena such as the traveling of light and gravity. In the 19th century, physicists postulated that ether permeated all throughout space, providing a medium through which light could travel in a vacuum, but evidence for the presence of such a medium was not found in the Michelson-Morley experiment, and this result has been interpreted as meaning that no such luminiferous ether exists. Michelson-Morley experiment will go into that another time. Mythological origins. The word aether in Greek, in Homeric Greek, means pure, fresh air or clean sky. In Greek mythology, it was thought to be the pure essence that the gods breathed, filling the space where they lived, analogous to the air breathed by us mortals. It's also personified as a deity, Ether, the son of Erebus and Nyx, in traditional Greek mythology. Ether is related to ethel, to incinerate, and intransitive, to burn, to shine. Related is the name Ethiopas, or Ethiopian, from Ethiopia, meaning people with a burnt black visage. The fifth element. In Plato's Timaeus, speaking about the air, Plato mentions that, quote, there is the most translucent kind which is called by the name of ether, aether in Greek, but otherwise he adopted the classical system of four elements. Aristotle, who had been Plato's student, and also Aristotle was also Alexander the Great's teacher. So Aristotle, who had been Plato's student at the Academia, agreed on this point with his former mentor, Plato, emphasizing additionally that fire has sometimes been mistaken for ether. However, in his book On the Heavens, he introduced a new first element to the system of the classical elements of Ionian philosophy. He noted that the four terrestrial classical elements were subject to change and naturally moved linearly. The first element, however, located in the celestial regions and heavenly bodies, moved circularly and had none of the qualities that the terrestrial classical elements had. It was neither hot nor cold, neither wet nor dry. With this addition, the system of elements was extended to five, and later commentators started referring to the new first one as the fifth, and also called the ether, a word that Aristotle had not used. Ether did not follow Aristotelian physics either. Ether was also incapable of motion of quality or motion of quantity. Ether was only capable of local motion. Ether naturally moved in circles and had no contrary or unnatural motion. Aristotle also mentioned that crystalline spheres made of ether held the celestial bodies. The idea of crystalline spheres and natural circular motion of ether led to Aristotle's explanation of the observed orbits of stars and planets in perfectly circular motion in crystalline ether. Medieval scholastic philosophers granted ether changes of density, in which the bodies of the planets were considered to be more dense than the medium which filled the rest of the universe. Robert Flood stated that the ether was the character that it was, quote, subtler than liquid, end quote. Flood cites the 3rd century view of Plotinus concerning the ether as penetrative and non-material. Now, what about quintessence? Quintessence is the Latinate name of the fifth element used by medieval alchemists for the medium similar or identical to that thought to make up the heavenly bodies. It was noted that there was very little presence of quintessence within the terrestrial sphere. Due to the low presence of quintessence, Earth could be affected by what takes place within the heavenly bodies. This theory was developed in the 14th century text the Testament of Lullius, attributed to Ramon Lull, the use of quintessence became popular within the medieval alchemy. Quintessence stemmed from the medieval element system, which consisted of the 4 classical elements, and ether or quintessence, in addition to 2 chemical elements, represented metals sulfur, the stone which burns, which characterized the principle of combustibility, and mercury, which contains the idealized principle of metallic properties. This elemental system spread rapidly throughout Europe and became popular with alchemists, especially in medicinal alchemy. Medicinal alchemy then sought to isolate quintessence and incorporate it within medicine and elixirs. Due to quintessence's pure and heavenly quality, it was thought that through consumption one may rid oneself of any impurities or illness. In the book of Quintessence, 15th century, English translation of a continental text, quintessence was used as a medicine for many of man's illnesses. The process given for the creation of quintessence is distillation of alcohol 7 times. Over the years, the term quintessence has become synonymous with elixirs, medicinal alchemy, and the philosopher's stone itself. The legacy of ethers. With the 18th century physics developments, physical models known as ether theories made up use of similar concepts for the explanation of propagation of electromagnetic and gravitational forces. As early as the 1670s, Newton used the idea of ether to help match observations to strict mechanical rules of his physics. But the early modern ether had little in common with the ether of classical elements, from which was the name borrowed, and these ether theories are considered to be scientifically obsolete, as the development of special relativity showed that Maxwell's equations do not require the ether for the transmission of these forces. However, Einstein himself noted that his own model, which replaced these theories, could itself be thought of as an ether, as it implied that the empty space between objects had its own physical properties. Despite the early modern ether models being superseded by general relativity, occasionally some physicists have attempted to reintroduce the concept of ether in an attempt to address perceived deficiencies in current physical models. One proposed model of dark energy has been named quintessence, quote-unquote, by its proponents in honor of the classical element. This idea relates to the hypothetical form of dark energy postulated as an explanation of observations of an accelerated universe. It has also been called the 5th fundamental force. Ether and light. The motion of light was a long-standing investigation in physics for hundreds of years before the 20th century. The use of ether to describe this motion was popular during the 17th and 18th centuries, including a theory proposed by Jonathan Il Bernoulli, who was recognized in 1736 with a prize of the French Academy, and in his theory, all space is permeated by ether, containing excessively small whirlpools. These whirlpools allow for ether to have a certain elasticity, transmitting vibrations from the corpuscular packets of light as they travel through. This theory of luminiferous ether would influence the wave theory of light proposed by Christian Huygens, in which light traveled in the form of longitudinal waves via an omnipresent, perfectly elastic medium having zero density called ether. At the time, it was thought that in order for light to travel through a vacuum, there must have been a medium filling the void through which it could propagate, as sound through air or ripples in a pool. Later, when it was proved that the nature of light wave is transverse instead of longitudinal, Huygens' theory was replaced by subsequent theories proposed by Maxwell, Einstein, and de Broglie, which rejected the existence and necessity of ether to explain the various optical phenomena. And these theories were supported by the result of the Michelson-Morley experiment, in which evidence for the motion of ether was conclusively absent. The results of the experiment influenced many physicists of the time and contributed to eventual development of Einstein's theory of special relativity. Ether and gravity. Ether has been used in various gravitational theories as a medium to help explain gravitation and what it causes. In 1682, Jacob Bernoulli formulated the theory that the hardness of the bodies depended on the pressure of the ether. A few years later, ether was used in one of Sir Isaac Newton's first published theories of gravitation, Philosophiae Neutralis Principia Mathematica, Principia, in 1687. He based the whole description of planetary motions in a theoretical law of dynamic interactions. He renounced standing attempts at accounting for this particular form of interaction between distant bodies by introducing a mechanism of propagation through intervening medium, and he calls this intervening medium ether. In this ether model, Newton described ether as a medium that flows, quote unquote, continually downward towards the Earth's surface and is partially absorbed and partially diffused. This circulation of ether is what he associated the form of gravity with to help explain the action of gravity in a non-mechanical fashion. This theory described different ether densities, creating an ether density gradient. His theory also explains why ether was dense within objects and rare without them. As particles of denser ether interacted with the rare ether, they were attracted back to the dense ether, much like cooling vapors of water are attracted back to each other to form water. In the Principia, he attempts to explain the elasticity and movement of ether by relating ether to his static model of fluids. This elastic interaction is what caused the pull of gravity to take place according to this early theory, and allowed an explanation for action at a distance instead of acting through direct contact. Newton also explained the changing rarity and density of ether in his letter to Robert Boyle in 1679. He illustrated ether and its field around objects in this letter, as well as used this as a way to inform Robert Boyle about his theory. Although Newton eventually changed his theory of gravitation to one involving force and the laws of motion, his starting point for the modern understanding and explanation of gravity came from his original ether model on gravity. So that is ether. Some people believe it's there, some people believe it's not, that it fills the universe. This is according to Wikipedia. If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events not covered by mainstream media, and not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition and the community around our church. Thank you.